I came home early with a migraine and found my aunt cutting the neckline of my dress. When I asked why she had a key, she smiled and said, "I needed access to protect you from yourself." I stayed silent. That was 3 months ago. This morning, she was pacing outside my apartment, holding a deadbolt and a folder of medical lies. I discovered my aunt had been breaking into my apartment for months, replacing all my clothes with shapeless sweaters and swapping my makeup for products that made my skin break out. My Aunt Rachel had always been paranoid about men. When I was growing up, she'd quiz every boy who came near me and made me carry pepper spray to school starting in 6th grade. She'd tell me horror stories about what men could do and wouldn't let me go to sleepovers if brothers would be home. My mom tried to balance her out, but Aunt Rachel lived next door and inserted herself into everything. I thought moving 2 hours away after college would give me space, but distance just made her sneakier. She'd call every night asking if I'd checked my locks and whether any men had bothered me that day. When I told her about my breakup with Jack, she drove down immediately and stayed for a week, constantly reminding me that I was better off alone. One evening I came home early from work with a migraine and found Aunt Rachel in my bedroom with a pair of scissors, cutting the neckline of my dress higher. She had a key she'd copied during her visit after the breakup and had been making my apartment safer for months. She pulled out a notebook and showed me her list. Replace fitted clothes with baggy ones, swap makeup for expired products, install extra locks, cut hair shorter, remove all wine and romantic movies. When I said I was calling the police, she showed me her phone. She had screenshots of my medical records from the clinic where she worked as an administrator. The records showed treatments for multiple STDs and 3 pregnancy terminations that never happened. She said any employer who ran a medical background check would see them. Any man I dated could request my health history. My parents would be devastated. The records looked completely legitimate because they were in the actual system. My makeup either did nothing or gave me rashes, so I stopped wearing it entirely. She'd installed 3 deadbolts on my door that took forever to unlock. While I slept, she'd trimmed my hair unevenly, so I had to keep cutting it shorter to fix it. My windows had new locks that barely let them open an inch. Aunt Rachel had set up cameras and motion sensors. If a delivery guy stood at my door too long, she'd call screaming about stranger danger. She'd replaced my birth control with vitamins because she said I didn't need it anyway. She threw out my razors and hair removal cream because smooth skin attracted predators. She even swapped my perfume with bug spray. I found out she'd been adding supplements to my food. My coffee tasted bitter because she'd been mixing in some herb that supposedly decreased libido. My yogurt had grainy texture from protein powder meant to make me gain weight. She'd poked holes in my fruit to inject vitamin concoctions. Every time I tried to fight back, she'd remind me about the medical records. She'd say one request from any insurance company would reveal my history. One background check from a serious boyfriend would show I was damaged goods. She had me trapped in this protective prison with official documents that would follow me forever. I started believing it was manageable until my coworker Emma asked to grab drinks after work. When she saw my apartment with all its locks and my wardrobe of potato sacks, I broke down and told her everything. She was shocked and said this wasn't protection, it was control. She helped me realize how insane my life had become. Emma came with me to change the locks and buy new clothes. For 2 weeks, I kept Aunt Rachel out. She'd stand in the hallway wailing about how men would hurt me without her protection. She left voicemails listing every woman who'd ever been harmed by a man. I ignored them all. I was finally free to be myself again. Aunt Rachel lost it when she couldn't get in. She called my parents saying I was having a breakdown and dating dangerous men. She told my boss I was too traumatized to work with male clients. She called the police saying Emma was drugging me. She even contacted my ex Jack warning him to stay away, or she'd accuse him of abuse. Then she got desperate. She bribed my landlord to let her in for a wellness check. I'd come home to find new locks installed, my clothes replaced again, all my makeup thrown out. She'd leave notes saying this was tough love, and if I removed anything, she'd update my medical records with worse diagnoses. She started showing up at my office with homemade lunches in front of my coworkers, loudly asking if any men had bothered me. She told people I had PTSD and needed constant monitoring. But Aunt Rachel made a crucial error. While installing a new deadbolt, she left her tablet behind. It was still logged into the clinic's system with her administrator access. I could see the entire history of alterations she'd made to my records, with timestamps and her user ID on every fake entry. She'd even kept notes about what conditions would seem most believable and damaging. I screenshotted everything and finally had proof of her deception. I knew I had to act fast. Aunt Rachel would realize her tablet was missing soon, and once she did, she'd change all her passwords and probably add even worse things to my records. My hands shook as I transferred every screenshot to multiple cloud accounts and emailed copies to Emma for safekeeping. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Aunt Rachel's wild eyes darting around the hallway. She clutched a new set of locks in one hand and what looked like medical forms in the other. I stayed silent, watching her pace back and forth, muttering about ungrateful nieces and dangerous men lurking everywhere. She finally left after an hour, but I knew she'd be back. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching my options. The evidence on her tablet was damning, but I needed to be strategic. One wrong move and she might follow through on her threats before I could stop her. Emma came over that evening with Chinese takeout and her laptop. We spread out all the screenshots and started organizing them chronologically. The earliest entries dated back 3 years, right after I'd graduated college. She'd started small, just adding a note about anxiety medication I'd never taken. Over time, the false entries became more elaborate and damaging. We discovered something else disturbing in her tablet notes. She'd been researching ways to make me seem mentally unstable. There were links to articles about delusional disorders, paranoid behavior, and how to document someone's deteriorating mental state. She'd even drafted fake therapy session notes claiming I had violent tendencies toward men. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking if I was okay. Aunt Rachel had called her crying, saying I'd stolen important medical equipment and was having a psychotic break. I wanted to tell my mom everything, but I needed more time to prepare. I texted back that I was fine and would call her tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. Every noise in the hallway made me jump, expecting Aunt Rachel to somehow break through my locks. Around 3 a.m., I heard scratching sounds at my door. Through the peephole, I saw her on her knees, trying to pick the lock with what looked like dental tools. I recorded her on my phone, adding to my growing collection of evidence. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate. Emma noticed and pulled me aside during lunch. She'd been thinking about our situation and had an idea. Her cousin worked in healthcare IT and might know how to properly document the unauthorized access to medical records. We needed expert testimony that these changes were made without proper authorization. Aunt Rachel escalated her tactics. She started calling my workplace every hour, asking to speak to me about urgent family medical matters. When the receptionist stopped putting her through, she showed up in person with a wheelchair, loudly telling everyone I had mobility issues from a car accident that never happened. Security had to escort her out when she tried to force me into the chair. She then targeted my neighbors. She knocked on every door in my building, warning them I was dangerous and asking them to report any male visitors. She gave them flyers with my photo and a list of warning signs that I might be in an abusive relationship. Most neighbors ignored her, but a few started giving me suspicious looks. I found out she'd been calling local gyms to cancel memberships I didn't have, telling them I had a heart condition. She'd contacted dating apps to report my profiles as fake, even though I hadn't used any in months. She even called restaurants where I'd made reservations, claiming I had severe food allergies and couldn't eat anything they served. Emma's cousin Marcus agreed to look at the screenshots. He confirmed what we suspected. The timestamps and user logs clearly showed unauthorized access and falsification of medical records. He explained this was a serious federal crime, but prosecuting family members was always complicated. He suggested we first try resolving it without involving law enforcement. Aunt Rachel must have sensed I was planning something. Her behavior became more erratic. She started sleeping in her car outside my building, keeping watch for any men who might approach me. She followed me to the grocery store, removing items from my cart she deemed too suggestive: red wine, chocolate, even bananas. Other shoppers stared as she lectured me about purity in the produce section. She created fake social media profiles to message my friends, warning them I was being trafficked and asking if they'd noticed any suspicious bruises. Several friends called me confused and concerned. I had to explain the situation repeatedly, which was exhausting and humiliating. One morning, I found she'd superglued toothpicks into my car's door locks. A note under the windshield wiper said, "Walking was safer anyway since I couldn't be abducted as easily." What's really going on with Aunt Rachel's job at this clinic that gives her so much power over medical records? The way she's been slowly changing these files for 3 years makes me wonder if anyone else at her workplace knows what she's capable of. The locksmith who came to fix it said he'd seen controlling behavior before, but this was extreme. He gave me his card and said to call if I needed help documenting anything for a restraining order. Work became my only refuge, but even that was under threat. Aunt Rachel had started calling my biggest clients, telling them I was too traumatized to handle their accounts properly. She'd hint at my medical issues without giving specifics, letting their imaginations fill in the worst. My boss had to field several concerned calls asking if I was fit to continue working. Emma suggested we needed to act before Aunt Rachel destroyed my career entirely. We spent the weekend creating a comprehensive timeline of her actions, organizing all the evidence, and preparing for confrontation. We decided the best approach was to involve my parents as witnesses. They needed to see the truth about what Rachel had been doing. I called my mom and asked both my parents to come for dinner that Sunday, saying I had something important to discuss. I didn't mention Aunt Rachel, but I could hear the worry in my mom's voice. She probably assumed I was announcing something terrible, given all of Rachel's recent calls about my supposed breakdown. To prepare, I changed my apartment locks one more time and had security cameras installed. I wanted everything documented if Aunt Rachel tried to interfere. Emma helped me restore my apartment to how I wanted it. Colorful clothes back in the closet, makeup organized on the vanity, the extra deadbolts removed. It felt like reclaiming my life piece by piece. Saturday night, Aunt Rachel made her boldest move yet. She convinced my elderly landlord that there was a gas leak in my apartment and he needed to let her in immediately for safety. By the time I got home, she'd ransacked the place. My new clothes were in garbage bags by the door. She'd poured bleach on my makeup to destroy the toxins. The security cameras were covered with tape, but she'd made a crucial mistake in her frenzy. She'd left behind a folder containing printed emails between her and various medical contacts, discussing how to make falsified records look authentic. There were conversations about which diagnoses would be most believable and damaging, which medications would show up in employment substance screenings, and how to backdate entries to avoid suspicion. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by destroyed belongings and new evidence, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. She'd finally given me everything I needed to expose her completely. Tomorrow's dinner with my parents would change everything. I just had to make it through one more night. Emma stayed over for safety, sleeping on the couch while I barricaded myself in the bedroom. We could hear Aunt Rachel's car idling outside, see her shadow pacing the sidewalk. She'd lost all pretense of normalcy, consumed by her need to control me, but her desperation had made her sloppy, and that would be her downfall. As dawn broke, I looked at the folder of evidence one more time. Medical fraud, breaking and entering, harassment, stalking. She'd committed so many crimes in her twisted mission to protect me. Part of me felt sad for her, living in such paranoid fear, but mostly, I felt ready to finally break free from her suffocating grip. Today would be the beginning of my real independence. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window as I carefully arranged the evidence folders on my dining table. Emma helped me create multiple backup copies of everything, storing them in different locations. We both knew Aunt Rachel would try something before my parents arrived. My prediction proved accurate when I heard commotion in the hallway around noon. Through the peephole, I watched Aunt Rachel arguing with my landlord, waving what appeared to be official-looking documents. She gestured wildly at my door, her face red with frustration. The landlord shook his head repeatedly, pointing at his watch and walking away. Whatever story she'd concocted this time hadn't worked. Emma and I spent the afternoon preparing for every possible scenario. We role-played different conversations, anticipated Aunt Rachel's likely accusations, and organized the evidence in the most compelling order. The tablet screenshots went first, followed by the folder of emails, then the video footage of her trying to break in at 3 a.m. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang incessantly. Aunt Rachel called from different numbers, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. She claimed I'd stolen confidential patient information, that I was having a mental breakdown, that Emma was part of a trafficking ring. Each message became more unhinged than the last. I saved them all as additional evidence. My parents arrived early, which caught me off guard. Through the window, I saw them parking just as Aunt Rachel's car pulled up behind them. She practically leaped from her vehicle, rushing to intercept them before they reached my building. From 3 floors up, I watched her animated gestures, saw my mother's confused expression, my father's growing concern. Emma squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as we watched the scene unfold below. Aunt Rachel pulled papers from her purse, shoving them at my parents. My mother stepped back, shaking her head. My father held up his hands in a calming gesture. The conversation continued for several minutes before my parents finally walked toward my building, leaving Aunt Rachel standing on the sidewalk. The knock on my door came moments later. I opened it to find my parents looking worried and confused. My mother immediately pulled me into a hug, checking me over as if looking for signs of the mental breakdown Aunt Rachel had described. My father's eyes swept the apartment, taking in the normal furnishings, the lack of chaos Aunt Rachel had promised them they'd find. I invited them in and offered tea, trying to keep my hands steady as I prepared it. Emma introduced herself politely, explaining she was there for moral support. My mother kept glancing between us, clearly trying to reconcile the scene before her with whatever wild tales Aunt Rachel had been spinning. Before I could begin explaining, we heard pounding on the door. Aunt Rachel's voice carried through, demanding to be let in, insisting she needed to protect me from myself. My father moved toward the door, but I stopped him, asking him to wait. I wanted them to hear her behavior for themselves. The pounding intensified. Aunt Rachel began listing all the dangers I faced, the men who would hurt me, the diseases I'd contract without her protection. She claimed Emma had brainwashed me, that I was too naive to see the manipulation. Her rant continued for several minutes while my parents listened in growing disbelief. When she finally paused, I opened the door slightly, keeping the chain on. Aunt Rachel tried to push past me, but the chain held. She thrust a handful of papers through the gap, claiming they were medical forms that proved I needed supervision. I took them calmly and closed the door again. The papers were psychiatric evaluation forms with my name on them, dated just yesterday. They described symptoms I'd never experienced, medications I'd never taken, therapy sessions that never happened. The forms looked official, complete with letterhead from the clinic where she worked. My parents examined them, their confusion deepening. I led them to the dining table where I'd arranged all the evidence. Starting with the tablet screenshots, I showed them the systematic falsification of my medical records. The timestamps clearly showed Aunt Rachel's user ID making changes after hours. Each entry was more damaging than the last, painting a picture of someone deeply disturbed who'd never actually existed. My mother's face went pale as she read through the fake STD treatments and pregnancy terminations. My father's jaw tightened when he saw the psychiatric diagnoses that had been added just last week. Emma quietly provided context, explaining how these false records could destroy my career, my relationships, my entire future. The folder of emails came next. My parents read through Aunt Rachel's correspondence with her medical contacts, her careful planning of which conditions would seem most believable. She'd researched which diagnoses would show up in background checks, which medications would flag in substance tests, how to make everything look legitimate in the system. Pounding erupted at the door again. This time, Aunt Rachel claimed she'd called the police, that I was holding my parents hostage, that Emma was armed and dangerous. We ignored her, but I could see my parents growing more disturbed with each passing moment. The woman they'd trusted for years was revealing herself as someone entirely different. I showed them the video from 3 a.m., Aunt Rachel on her knees with dental tools, trying to break into my apartment. Then came photos of the superglued locks, the destroyed clothes, the bleached makeup. Emma helped explain the pattern of control, how it had escalated over months, how the false medical records were used as blackmail to keep me compliant. My mother started crying when she saw the list Aunt Rachel had made, the methodical plan to control every aspect of my appearance and behavior. My father's hands clenched into fists as he read about the supplements in my food, the birth control replaced with vitamins, the systematic destruction of anything that might make me attractive to men. The pounding at the door stopped abruptly. We heard Aunt Rachel in the hallway, talking loudly on her phone. She was calling various family members, telling them I'd been brainwashed by a cult, that my parents were in danger, that someone needed to intervene immediately. Her voice grew more hysterical with each call. My phone began buzzing with texts from cousins, aunts, uncles, all asking what was happening. Aunt Rachel had told them I'd joined a dangerous group, that Emma was the leader, that my parents were being held against their will. Rachel's getting more creative with her lies, from gas leaks to trafficking rings to cult leader Emma. Someone should tell her that throwing every wild story at the wall just makes the crazy stick out more. The family group chat exploded with concern and confusion. I showed my parents the saved voicemails from the past weeks. They listened to Aunt Rachel's increasingly unhinged messages, her detailed fantasies about the dangers I faced, her threats about updating my medical records if I didn't comply. My mother had to sit down, overwhelmed by the revelation of her sister's behavior. Emma pulled up her laptop, showing my parents the research she'd done on similar cases. She explained how this type of control often escalated, how the false medical records could have lifelong consequences, how important it was to act quickly before more damage was done. My parents listened intently, their initial skepticism completely gone. We heard sirens approaching, and my heart sank. Aunt Rachel had actually called the police. Through the window, we watched 2 officers exit their vehicle. Aunt Rachel rushed to meet them, gesturing frantically toward my building. Even from this distance, we could see the officers' skeptical expressions as she ranted. Minutes later, a knock came at the door. The officers identified themselves politely, explaining they'd received a call about a possible hostage situation. I invited them in, and they quickly assessed that everyone was safe and there willingly. My parents confirmed they were fine, that they were simply having a family discussion. The officers asked about the nature of the complaint. I showed them some of the evidence, explaining the situation briefly. They exchanged glances when they saw the video of Aunt Rachel trying to break in, the false medical records, the pattern of harassment. One officer mentioned they'd had multiple calls from her over the past weeks, all claiming various emergencies that proved false. After confirming everyone was safe, the officers left, but not before suggesting I might want to consider a restraining order. They gave Aunt Rachel a warning about false reports before departing. Through the window, we watched her argue with them, her gestures becoming increasingly dramatic as they walked away. My father was the first to speak after the officers left. He apologized for not seeing the signs sooner, for dismissing my concerns about Aunt Rachel as simple family friction. My mother struggled to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the person revealed in the evidence before her. Emma offered to give us privacy, but I asked her to stay. We spent the next hour going through more evidence, painting a complete picture of Aunt Rachel's campaign of control. My parents asked questions, trying to understand how things had gotten so bad. I explained how it had started small, how each boundary violation had been explained away as concern, how the threats had kept me silent. Aunt Rachel returned to pounding on the door, this time claiming she had a medical emergency, that her heart was racing, that she needed help. My mother moved instinctively toward the door, but my father stopped her. We all recognized the manipulation now, the desperate attempt to regain control through false crisis. I called building security, reporting the continued harassment. They arrived within minutes, finding Aunt Rachel slumped against my door, clutching her chest dramatically. When they offered to call an ambulance, she suddenly recovered, insisting she just needed to see her family. They escorted her from the building as she protested loudly. My mother finally broke down completely, sobbing as she apologized for not protecting me better. She admitted she'd always known Aunt Rachel was overprotective, but never imagined it had become so twisted. My father held her, his own eyes wet as he processed how badly they'd failed to see what was happening. Emma quietly made more tea while my family processed everything. She'd become an invaluable support through this ordeal, never judging, always helping me see clearly. My parents thanked her repeatedly for being there for me when they hadn't been. The guilt in their voices was painful to hear. As evening approached, we discussed next steps. My parents wanted to confront Aunt Rachel immediately, but I needed them to understand the danger. She still had access to the medical system, could still add more false records, could still destroy my life with a few keystrokes. We needed to be strategic, not emotional. My phone rang again. This time it was my boss, apologizing for calling on Sunday, but concerned about the numerous calls they'd received. Aunt Rachel had contacted several board members, claiming I was mentally unstable and shouldn't be trusted with client information. She'd even suggested they do a wellness check at my home. I put the call on speaker so my parents could hear. My boss expressed support, but admitted the board was concerned about the allegations. They needed some kind of assurance that the claims were false. The damage to my professional reputation was already beginning, just as Aunt Rachel had threatened. After ending the call, my father's calm demeanor cracked. He slammed his hand on the table, angry at himself for enabling Aunt Rachel's behavior for so long. My mother revealed that Aunt Rachel had always been paranoid about men since college, when she'd had a bad relationship, but they'd thought she'd grown past it. Emma suggested we needed to act quickly to protect my job. We couldn't wait for a perfect moment. Aunt Rachel was actively destroying my life while we sat here talking. talking. My parents agreed, finally understanding the urgency. We began formulating a plan to expose her actions at the clinic where she worked. The building's main door buzzer rang repeatedly. Aunt Rachel was trying to get other tenants to let her in, claiming various emergencies. We could hear her through the intercom system, telling different stories to different apartments. Most ignored her, but eventually someone buzzed her in, probably just to stop the noise. We heard her in the hallway again, but this time she wasn't alone. She'd brought my uncle, her husband, who we could hear trying to calm her down. He knocked on my door politely, asking if we could all talk like adults. My parents looked at me, letting me decide. I agreed to open the door but kept the chain on. My uncle looked exhausted. Through the gap, he explained that Aunt Rachel had been spiraling for weeks, that he'd tried to get her help, but she insisted she was fine. He asked if he could come in alone, just to talk. Aunt Rachel protested loudly, but he firmly told her to wait in the hallway. I let my uncle in, watching Aunt Rachel pace the hallway like a caged animal. My uncle saw the evidence laid out on the table and his shoulders sagged. He admitted he'd suspected something was wrong when Aunt Rachel started spending all her time focused on me, when she'd installed tracking apps on her phone to monitor my location. He revealed more disturbing details. Aunt Rachel had been using her work computer to research surveillance equipment, had joined online forums about protecting family members from predators, had become obsessed with stories of women being harmed. She'd stopped sleeping, staying up all night monitoring the cameras she'd hidden around my building. My uncle pulled out his own phone, showing us messages from Aunt Rachel that revealed her deteriorating mental state. She'd sent him detailed plans about how to keep me safe, including ideas about moving me to a remote location where no men could find me. The messages grew more paranoid and elaborate over time. He also revealed that Aunt Rachel had been warned at work about accessing records inappropriately. She'd looked up medical files of my male coworkers, trying to find dirt on them. She'd researched every man who lived in my building, searching for criminal records or concerning medical histories. Her supervisor had documented several violations. This information changed everything. With her employer already aware of inappropriate behavior, we had more leverage than we'd realized. My uncle offered to help us report her actions properly, to ensure she faced consequences while also getting the help she clearly needed. His support meant everything in that moment. We could hear Aunt Rachel in the hallway, talking to herself now. She was listing all the ways men could hurt women, reciting statistics and horror stories in a continuous loop. My uncle's face crumpled as he listened to his wife's breakdown. He admitted he'd been in denial about how bad things had gotten. My parents and uncle stepped into the hallway to talk with Aunt Rachel. I watched through the cracked door as they tried to reason with her. She accused them all of being brainwashed, of not understanding the danger I was in. When they mentioned getting her help, she became more agitated, insisting she was the only sane one. The confrontation escalated when Aunt Rachel tried to push past them to get to my door. My father had to physically block her while my mother pleaded with her to calm down. My uncle looked devastated as his wife struggled against them, screaming about protecting me from invisible threats. Eventually, they managed to guide Aunt Rachel away from my door. My uncle promised to take her home and get her immediate help. As they left, we could hear her still ranting about the dangers I faced, the predators lurking everywhere, the need to keep me safe at any cost. Her voice faded as the elevator doors closed. My parents returned to my apartment, emotionally drained. We sat in silence for a moment, processing what we'd witnessed. The aunt who'd helped raise me, who'd been part of every family gathering, had completely unraveled. The paranoia that had always simmered beneath the surface had consumed her entirely. Emma began helping us plan the next steps. We needed to report the medical record falsification to the clinic first thing Monday morning. My uncle had promised to support our report, providing documentation of Aunt Rachel's concerning behavior. We also needed to address the damage to my reputation at work and with our extended family. Well, nothing says Sunday family dinner quite like police visits and hallway meltdowns, though credit to the uncle for finally showing up like the exhausted voice of reason nobody ordered but definitely needed here. As the evening wore on, my parents helped me clean up the apartment, removing all traces of Aunt Rachel's intrusions. We found more hidden cameras, tiny devices tucked into air vents and light fixtures. The extent of her surveillance was staggering. My father carefully bagged each device as evidence. My mother discovered Aunt Rachel's notebook wedged behind my refrigerator. Inside were detailed logs of my movements, notes about every person I'd interacted with, risk assessments for various activities. She'd been tracking my menstrual cycle, monitoring my food intake, documenting my sleep patterns. The invasion of privacy was absolute. We ordered dinner, none of us having the energy to cook. As we ate, my parents shared stories about Aunt Rachel from before I was born, trying to understand when things had started going wrong. They remembered her college boyfriend, the one who'd cheated on her repeatedly, who'd been emotionally abusive. The paranoia had started then, but had seemed manageable for years. Emma excused herself after dinner, hugging me tightly before leaving. She promised to be available if I needed anything, if Aunt Rachel tried anything else. My parents thanked her again for being such a good friend. Without her support, I might never have found the strength to fight back against Aunt Rachel's control. As my parents prepared to leave, we made plans for the next day. They would go with me to the clinic to file the formal complaint. My father, a respected businessman in town, hoped his presence would ensure the complaint was taken seriously. My mother would handle damage control with the extended family, explaining the truth about what had been happening. Before they left, both my parents apologized again for not seeing the signs sooner. I assured them that Aunt Rachel had been clever in her manipulation, making each step seem like reasonable concern. We'd all been slowly conditioned to accept her behavior as normal. It had taken an outside perspective like Emma's to break the spell. Alone in my apartment finally, I double-checked all the locks, a habit that would take time to break. The silence felt strange after the chaos of the day. I looked around at my reclaimed space, my clothes hanging properly in the closet, my makeup arranged on the vanity, simple freedoms that Aunt Rachel had tried to steal from me. I pulled out the tablet again, reviewing the evidence one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we formally reported her actions. There would be investigations, questions, and undoubtedly more attempts by Aunt Rachel to maintain control. But I had support now, people who believed me, proof of what she'd done. My phone buzzed with a text from my uncle. Aunt Rachel was refusing to accept she needed help, insisting everyone else was wrong. He was considering having her evaluated at a psychiatric facility, but she was fighting him every step. He promised to keep her away from me while they sorted through her treatment options. I thought about responding, but decided to wait until morning. Tonight, I needed to process everything that had happened. The woman who'd claimed to protect me had become my greatest threat. The family member who'd sworn to keep me safe had systematically tried to destroy my life. Looking at the evidence spread across my table, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the aunt I'd lost to paranoia and control. Relief that her reign of terror was finally ending. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I could sleep knowing the truth was finally out. I gathered up the papers, organizing them carefully for tomorrow's meeting at the clinic. Each piece of evidence represented a violation of trust, a breach of the love family members should share, but they also represented my freedom, my chance to reclaim the life Aunt Rachel had tried to steal. As I prepared for bed, I noticed something I'd missed before. In Aunt Rachel's notebook, tucked between pages of surveillance logs, was an old photo. It showed her in college, smiling smiling and carefree, before the paranoia had taken hold, before she decided the world was too dangerous for the women she loved, before protection became control. I set the photo aside, a reminder that Aunt Rachel hadn't always been this way. Mental illness had twisted her love into something destructive. Tomorrow, we'd begin the process of stopping her harmful actions while hopefully getting her the help she desperately needed. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. The evidence was overwhelming, the support system was in place, and for the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful. Aunt Rachel's control was broken. Her threats were exposed. The false medical records would be corrected. My life could finally return to normal, or better than normal, because I'd learned to stand up for myself. Tomorrow would bring confrontations at the clinic, difficult conversations with extended family, and the complex process of untangling Aunt Rachel's web of lies. But tonight, I could rest knowing I'd won the first battle. The truth was more powerful than her paranoid delusions. And with my parents, uncle, and Emma supporting me, I knew I could face whatever came next. The morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I dressed carefully, choosing professional clothes that Aunt Rachel hadn't touched. My parents picked me up at 8 sharp, and we drove to the clinic in tense silence. The folder of evidence sat heavy in my lap. The clinic's parking lot was nearly empty this early. We walked through the main entrance, my father's presence commanding immediate attention from the receptionist. He explained we needed to speak with the director about a serious matter involving an employee. Within minutes, we were ushered into a conference room. The director, a stern woman named Dr. Martinez, listened as I laid out the evidence piece by piece. Her expression shifted from skepticism to alarm as she examined the tablet screenshots showing Aunt Rachel's after-hours access to the system. The timestamps were undeniable. Each falsified entry bore her digital signature. Dr. Martinez called in the head of IT security. He confirmed the access logs matched what we were showing him. The system recorded every keystroke, every file opened, every change made. Aunt Rachel had left a digital trail that couldn't be disputed. He began pulling up additional records on his laptop. My mother handed over the folder of printed emails where Aunt Rachel had discussed with contacts how to make false diagnoses look believable. Dr. Martinez's face darkened as she read through the deliberate planning, the research into which conditions would be most damaging. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated campaign. The IT specialist discovered more alterations we hadn't found. Aunt Rachel had accessed dozens of files, though mine had received the most extensive changes. She'd also been flagging my name in various medical databases, ensuring any background check would immediately surface the false information. The scope was staggering. Dr. Martinez excused herself to make phone calls. Through the glass door, we could see her pacing, her gestures becoming more animated with each conversation. She returned with the clinic's legal counsel and head of human resources. The situation had escalated beyond a simple employee violation. They asked me to document everything in a formal statement. I wrote for nearly an hour, detailing every incident, every threat, every violation of my privacy. My parents added their own statements about what they'd witnessed. The legal counsel took notes, occasionally asking for clarification on specific dates and incidents. The head of HR pulled up Aunt Rachel's employment file. There had been previous warnings about inappropriate record access, complaints from other staff about her paranoid behavior, concerns about her making personal calls during work hours to check on family members. A pattern emerged that they'd failed to address adequately. Dr. Martinez assured us that all false entries would be removed from my medical records immediately. The IT specialist would personally oversee the cleanup, ensuring no trace remained in any connected systems. They would also flag my file to prevent any future unauthorized access, requiring director-level approval for any changes. The legal counsel explained that Aunt Rachel's actions constituted multiple violations of federal healthcare privacy laws. The clinic would be conducting a full investigation and cooperating with any law enforcement inquiry. They asked if I intended to press criminal charges. I said I needed time to consider my options. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez apologized profusely for the clinic's failure to prevent this abuse. She promised a complete review of their security protocols and employee monitoring systems. The damage to their reputation could be severe if this became public, and they knew it. Outside, my uncle was waiting by his car. He looked haggard, having spent the night trying to manage Aunt Rachel's increasingly erratic behavior. She'd barricaded herself in their bedroom, refusing to come out, convinced that everyone was conspiring against her. He'd finally called her doctor, who prescribed sedatives. My uncle handed me a box containing items Aunt Rachel had taken from my apartment over the months. Jewelry I thought I'd lost, photographs she'd deemed too provocative, even my spare car keys. He'd found them hidden in their garage along with detailed notes about my daily routines and social connections. He also gave me a letter Aunt Rachel had written years ago but never sent. In it, she described her fears about losing me to dangerous men, her certainty that only she could keep me safe. The rambling pages revealed a mind consumed by paranoid fantasies, seeing threats where none existed. It was heartbreaking to read. My parents drove me home, where Emma was waiting with lunch. She'd taken the day off to support me through whatever came next. The clinic director's quick shift from doubt to alarm seems pretty convenient once she saw those digital records. Makes me wonder if she already suspected something was off with Rachel, but chose to look the other way until now. We sat around my dining table, the same one where just yesterday we'd spread out evidence of Aunt Rachel's crimes. Now it held sandwiches and normal conversation. My boss called to check in. Word had somehow reached him about the situation at the clinic. He assured me that my position was secure, that they understood I'd been the victim of harassment. The board had decided to disregard any allegations made by Aunt Rachel. My professional reputation remained intact. Throughout the afternoon, relatives called as my mother spread the word about what had really been happening. Most were shocked but supportive. A few admitted they'd noticed Aunt Rachel's increasing obsession with my safety, but hadn't realized how far it had gone. The family group chat filled with messages of concern and disbelief. One cousin revealed that Aunt Rachel had contacted her months ago, asking her to spy on me during family gatherings. She'd wanted reports on any men I talked to, any signs I was dating, any behavior that suggested I was being influenced by dangerous people. My cousin had refused, thinking it was just Aunt Rachel being overprotective. Emma helped me go through my apartment one more time, checking for any surveillance devices we'd missed. We found 2 more tiny cameras, one in a smoke detector, another tucked behind a picture frame. The extent of the invasion made my skin crawl. Every private moment had been monitored. My landlord stopped by to apologize for giving Aunt Rachel access. He genuinely believed her stories about gas leaks and wellness checks. He offered to install new locks at his expense and upgrade the building's security system. He also promised to notify me immediately if she ever appeared at the building again. That evening, my uncle called with an update. Aunt Rachel had agreed to psychiatric evaluation after her doctor explained it was that, or involuntary commitment. She'd be staying at a facility for at least 2 weeks while they assessed her condition and adjusted medications. He sounded relieved to have professional help finally involved. The next few days blurred together. I met with a lawyer to understand my options regarding criminal charges. The evidence was overwhelming, but prosecuting family members was always complicated. I decided to wait and see if Aunt Rachel would accept treatment before making any final decisions about legal action. The clinic's IT team team worked meticulously to clean my medical records. They sent me daily updates showing the progress, each false entry being removed and documented. They also discovered that Aunt Rachel had been printing copies of various records, though they couldn't determine what she'd done with them. I returned to work, trying to establish normal routines. Coworkers who'd witnessed Aunt Rachel's dramatic visits expressed relief that the situation was resolved. A few shared their own stories of controlling family members, creating an unexpected support network. Emma remained my closest confidant through it all. My apartment slowly transformed back into a space that felt like mine. I bought new clothes to replace what Aunt Rachel had destroyed, arranged my belongings how I wanted them, removed all the extra locks she'd installed. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. The extended family's response varied. Some relatives were angry that Aunt Rachel had dragged them into her paranoid fantasies. Others expressed concern about her mental health, remembering the vibrant woman she'd been before fear consumed her. A few still seemed skeptical, unable to believe she'd gone so far. My parents struggled with guilt over missing the warning signs. They'd started attending a support group for families dealing with mental illness, trying to understand how to help Aunt Rachel while protecting me. The dynamic between them had shifted, growing stronger through shared purpose. A week into her psychiatric stay, Aunt Rachel sent me a letter through my uncle. Her handwriting was shaky, the medication affecting her motor control. She still insisted she'd been trying to protect me, but acknowledged that perhaps her methods had been extreme. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was progress. The clinic completed their internal investigation, finding systemic failures in their security protocols. Several employees received additional training on privacy laws and appropriate system access. Dr. Martinez sent me a formal letter confirming all false records had been permanently removed and apologizing again for their failure to prevent the abuse. I discovered that Aunt Rachel had created fake social media profiles, not just to contact my friends, but to monitor my online activity. She'd been screenshotting posts, analyzing photos for potential threats, even researching people who liked or commented on my content. The depth of surveillance was staggering. My uncle began the difficult process of removing all the surveillance equipment from their home. He found cameras in their guest room where I'd stayed during visits, recording devices in their car, even tracking software on his own phone. Aunt Rachel's paranoia had extended far beyond just monitoring me. 2 weeks passed before I heard that Aunt Rachel's evaluation was complete. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with delusional disorder, persecutory type, along with severe anxiety. They recommended extended inpatient treatment followed by intensive outpatient therapy. My uncle agreed to the treatment plan, exhausted but hopeful. The false medical records issue proved more complex than initially thought. While the clinic had removed everything from their system, Aunt Rachel had apparently shared some information with other healthcare providers, warning them about my supposed conditions. Each had to be contacted individually to correct their records. I started sleeping better, no longer jumping at every sound in the hallway. The hypervigilance that had become my normal state slowly faded. I could enjoy simple things again like wearing clothes I liked, going out without constantly checking if I was being followed, having normal conversations without wondering if they were being recorded. Emma and I grew closer through the ordeal. She'd seen me at my most vulnerable and never wavered in her support. We started spending more time together outside of work, building a friendship based on genuine connection rather than crisis. Her steady presence helped me remember what normal relationships looked like. My relationship with my parents evolved too. The crisis had forced honest conversations about family dynamics, boundaries, and communication. They made efforts to visit more often, to be present in my life without being intrusive. We were building something healthier than what we'd had before. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received notice that Aunt Rachel's access to any medical systems had been permanently revoked. Her professional licenses were under review. The clinic had reported her actions to the appropriate boards. Her career in healthcare was effectively over. My uncle filed for separation, unable to continue living with someone who'd violated so many boundaries. He'd supported her through mental health treatment, but couldn't forgive the deliberate harm she'd caused. Their house went on the market, too filled with memories of surveillance and paranoia to remain their home. The family gradually adjusted to the new reality. Holiday planning became complicated with Aunt Rachel in treatment and relationships strained. Some relatives chose sides. Others tried to remain neutral. The close-knit family I'd grown up with would never be quite the same. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and privacy violations. Our sessions helped me process the complex emotions around Aunt Rachel's betrayal. The hardest part was reconciling the aunt who'd baked cookies for my school events with the woman who'd systematically tried to control every aspect of my life. Months later, I stood in my apartment, truly free for the first time in years. The locks were normal, the clothes were mine, the food untampered. No cameras watched my movements. No one monitored my communications. The simple freedom of privacy felt like an incredible gift. Aunt Rachel remained in treatment, making slow progress according to my uncle's updates. She'd begun to acknowledge the harm she'd caused, though full accountability remained elusive. The medications helped quiet the paranoid thoughts that had driven her actions. Whether she'd ever fully recover remained uncertain. I chose not to pursue criminal charges, deciding that her loss of career, marriage, and freedom were consequence enough. The important thing was that she could no longer hurt me or anyone else. The false medical records were gone, my reputation restored, my life my own again. The experience taught me about the importance of boundaries, the danger of unchecked mental illness, and the power of having people who believe you. Emma's early recognition that something was wrong had started the process of reclaiming my life. My parents' eventual support had made victory possible. I kept the old photo of college-aged Aunt Rachel, a reminder that mental illness could twist love into something destructive. But I also kept the evidence folder, a reminder that I'd fought back and won. The balance between compassion and self-protection would be an ongoing navigation. Life settled into new patterns. Work thrived without constant interruptions. Friendships deepened without surveillance. Dating became possible again, though I remained cautious about sharing personal information. The hypervigilance faded, but left behind a healthy awareness of red flags. My story became a cautionary tale within our extended family about recognizing concerning behavior early. Parents paid more attention to boundary violations, to the difference between protection and control. The painful experience had at least created awareness that might prevent future situations. I reconnected with parts of myself that had been suppressed during Aunt Rachel's reign of control. Hobbies abandoned, friendships neglected, dreams deferred, all slowly returned. The apartment that had been a prison became a sanctuary of self-expression and freedom. The clinic implemented new policies based on our case, requiring multiple approvals for record modifications and regular audits of access logs. Dr. Martinez sent me updates on their progress, determined that no other patient would suffer similar violations. Systemic change emerged from personal trauma. 6 months after that confrontational Sunday, I barely recognized my life. The constant anxiety had lifted. Relationships felt genuine rather than monitored. Choices were mine to make. The simple act of buying red lipstick without fearing consequences felt revolutionary. Aunt Rachel was transferred to outpatient treatment, living in a supervised facility. She sent occasional letters through my uncle, each showing small progress in understanding her actions' impact. I read them but didn't respond, maintaining the boundary necessary for my own healing. My parents hosted a small family gathering, the first since everything had exploded. It felt different without Aunt Rachel's presence, her paranoid energy no longer dominating conversations. Relatives who'd been drawn into her delusions apologized for not questioning her stories. Healing happened slowly, one conversation at a time. I realized that recovery wasn't a destination, but an ongoing journey. Some days, I still double-checked locks obsessively, or felt watched, despite knowing better. Trauma left echoes that time would hopefully fade, but each day of normal life was a victory worth celebrating. The woman who'd tried to control me in the name of protection had ultimately taught me the importance of fighting for autonomy. Her twisted love had nearly destroyed me, but surviving it had made me stronger. I'd learned to recognize manipulation, to trust my instincts, to seek help when needed. Looking forward, I knew challenges remained. Aunt Rachel would eventually leave treatment. Family dynamics would continue evolving. The scars of betrayal would take time to fully heal, but I faced the future with confidence, knowing I'd already survived the worst. My apartment felt like home now, decorated with colors Aunt Rachel would have deemed too attention-seeking. I cooked meals without wondering what she'd added to them. I dressed how I wanted, went where I pleased, lived according to my own values. Freedom, once taken for granted, now felt precious. The false medical records were gone, but the memory of that violation remained. It had taught me about the vulnerability of personal information, the importance of system safeguards, the damage one person with access could cause. Lessons learned through pain often stuck the longest. Emma remained my closest friend. Our bond forged through crisis, but sustained through genuine affection. We laughed about normal things now, shared regular problems, built memories unrelated to trauma. She'd seen me at my worst and chosen to stay. That kind of friendship was rare. I kept the tablet evidence and printed emails in a safety deposit box, insurance against any future attempts at control. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, couldn't be fully restored. But I'd learned the difference between healthy caution and paranoid fear. Balance was possible. My life had returned to blessed ordinariness. Work deadlines, grocery shopping, weekend plans, all the mundane details that Aunt Rachel's interference had made impossible. Normal felt extraordinary after what I'd been through. Simple freedoms were daily gifts I no longer took for granted. The story could have ended differently. Without Emma's recognition, my parents' eventual support, the tablet evidence, I might still be trapped, but I'd fought back, exposed the truth, reclaimed my autonomy. That victory would always be mine, regardless of what the future held. Hey, appreciate you sticking through all that. Hopefully my dumb jokes made it a little less chaotic. Like the video, it helps more than you think.